You over there? What is that? There we go. I like that. That's better than the one up here. All right. We're studying in Matthew 24. And we have gotten down in our studies to the 15th. Well, we're gonna back up a little bit and look at He says, we're going to back up in verse 9. After he's talked about the wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, he says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then shall many be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. He that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. So I wanted to talk about that. He says many are going to walk away, and then as we look in the Bible, we see that. It says that in Matthew 24. In Luke 21, he says, ye shall be delivered up, even by parents and brethren and kinfolk and friends, and they shall put some of you to death. So your family and your friends were going to be the ones giving you up to the enemy. Ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, yet shall not a hair of your head perish. By your patience ye shall ye shall win your souls. And you see a couple of statements like this, for instance, in Timothy, 2 Timothy 4. Demas, who loved this present world, hath left me and gone to Thessalonica. At my first answer, no one stood by me, but all have deserted me. I pray God that this may not be imputed to them. There Paul was in Rome, left alone in 2 Timothy. This was just before his death. You can also see the repeated exhortations to Timothy throughout, especially 2 Timothy, to continue faithful. And it does the same thing in Hebrews and in the book of Peter and other New Testament books as 70 A.D. began to approach. In 2 Timothy 1 and verse 15, Paul says, this you know, that all who are in Asia have forsaken me, among whom are Phygellus and Hermogenes. Tacitus even writes about it. He says at first several were arrested. This is after the fire in Rome. He says at first several were arrested, Christians, and confessed. And then, because of their discovery, a great multitude of others were condemned and executed. So they passed it around on all of them. And then in verse 14, I think we may have studied that last week, but let's look in verse 14. This gospel, here, I'm going to get there in a minute. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world for a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. And what I've shown you is a map of roughly, a little bit after this time, but roughly this time, of the Roman Empire. And the gospel was being preached throughout this area in the whole world. The apostles went even to other countries as far as India, we think, and other places, Iran, Parthia, and so forth. Colossians 1:23 says, if you continue grounded and steadfast in the faith, and are not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you have heard, which was preached to in every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a minister. Every creature under heaven. It was accomplished before 70 A.D. In Colossians 1 and verse 6, he says, that which is coming to you as it is unto all the world, and bringeth forth fruit in you also. in Romans 16, verse 25. Now to him who is able to establish you according to my gospel and the preaching of Jesus Christ, according to the revelation of the mystery, kept secret since ancient times, but now made manifest and made known by the prophetic scriptures, according to the commandment of the eternal God to all nations, for the obedience of faith. Romans 10:18 says, have they not heard? Yes, indeed. His voice is coming to all the earth, and his words to the ends of the world. I don't think those were intended to imply that the gospel had been preached to the Aztecs and the Incas and the American Indians and all that sort of thing. But the gospel had spread to everybody they knew about and was spreading. And that's the implication, I think, of the verse. So what I'm trying to say to you is what Jesus said here has been and was being fulfilled. I want to talk now tonight. I think we may have talked about those things last week. Yes, last week. All these things run together on me, and I can't remember which ends up, which is kind of regular. He says in verse 15, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. So again, Matthew or Jesus is telling these Christians when to flee, when the disaster is going to come, and when their opportunity will be to get out of Dodge. Now, he says it's the abomination of desolation. Now, let me show you a couple of other passages. That 24:15 we just read. You might also look in Luke 21 and verse 20, parallel. He says, when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. And this we might refer to Daniel 9, 26 and 27, which is apparently the prophecy that's being referred to here. Now, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. Now, usually when you study this, it seems reasonable to say that these days were the equivalent of years. And I don't know if I'm not smart enough, and I haven't read after anybody who is smart enough to bring this down to a specific year in the New Testament period. You can get it to the New Testament period. You can get it there, but as for specificity, there's a little too much ambiguity as to when exactly this prophecy was intended to start and exactly when it was to be finished. You also had a lot of calendric manipulation during this time, but I can say this: Daniel 9 can be brought to the New Testament period by these 70 weeks. After 62 weeks, 72 weeks, excuse me, what is that? It would be 62, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with the flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured on the desolate. The overspreading of abominations. Now Mark, I've quoted to you Matthew and Luke, the parallels. You can also look at Mark 13 and verse 14. It says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not, let him that readeth understand. And let them in Judea flee unto the mountains. And you had the same thing in verse 24. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Now, we're going to try to figure this out. The word abomination here, you ladies may want to use this on your husband from time to time, is the idea of emitting a foul odor, or to turn away through loathing or disgust, to abhor. That's what the word abomination means. It means a stench, a stink. And you can see some other places the word's used. I don't know that there was just one abomination of desolation. We're going to look at here, and I think I can show you several others. You might notice Luke 16 and verse 15 when it says, He said unto them, Ye are they which justify yourselves before men, but God knoweth your hearts, for that which is highly esteemed among men is abomination in the sight of God. What sort of things, we're not going to study Luke 16, but what sort of things are highly esteemed among men? The Lord says it stinks to him. Said it's a foul odor. It's an abomination. Revelation 17 says, The woman is arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations, same word, and the filthiness of her fornication. Now then, what is the abomination of desolation? Well, there's several views. You can take one and see which one works for you. Probably the most favored interpretation of this is that this is a reference to the Roman eagles being put out. Those eagles that belonged to each legion. There were 4 of them around Jerusalem at one time. 2 of them early on under Cestius Gallus. But they were hated by the Jews. And the troops actually, you know, the guy carrying the flag out front, we've got that in our armies, the fellow who marches with the flags. The Roman soldiers actually worshiped those eagles. They actually worshiped them. So that's the majority rule, majority notion of this, perhaps due to some other statements later on in the 24th chapter. Another view is that it is a reference to the desecration of the temple under Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm going to tell you more about that than you want to know. But you might look at Daniel, the 11th chapter, and verse 31, where it says, Arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. That is a prophecy about what Antiochus Epiphanes did. He was a Greek ruler about 200 BC. Daniel 12, the same thing. From the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days, and that's usually a reference to the New Testament period. I put this picture up here to show you what it's talking. This is a reference or a picture trying to refer to that period under Antiochus. And what you see, let's see, you can't see it. I got, Steve and Leanne got me a pointer. Okay, what you see back here in the background is right here. And they're taking a pig, and that's what Antiochus did. He took a pig up on that altar in the temple to sacrifice it and made the thing polluted. Now, oh my, I got to look up some things. You want to know more about that? Oh, yes. Why not? I got to kill this. Maybe I can get it up. Who knows? I got to get my Bible up. Well, not exactly a Bible. This is in First Maccabees. I'm sure you all have it there. Maccabees is in the Apocrypha, and it covers that intertestamental period. It's not inspired. In fact, it says it's not inspired, but it's in the Catholic Bibles and so forth. But even though it says it's not inspired. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read you this. This is about what Antiochus did. There came out of them, that was Alexander the Great, of course, conquered Jerusalem, conquered Palestine, conquered all the way into India. He was close to being the greatest conqueror of all. I was reading the other day something like over 2 million square miles he controlled at one point. He did that before he was 30 years old, which is kind of incredible. I think Genghis Khan beat him out for more square miles controlled. First Maccabees 1:10. I'm going to read it here. If I get tired of reading, we'll go on. There came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many. Before Rome controlled Palestine, the Greeks did. Then they, under the Maccabean revolt, they got a limited period of time of independence, and then the Romans came in. And those days went there out of Israel wicked men who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we've had much sorrow. This device pleased them well. Certain of the men were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen. They built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. They built something like a coliseum. What do you call that? I can't think of the word. What? Stadium. Yeah, stadium for exercise. They also built a circus. Not a circus, but a racetrack. Things like that. And the Jews hated that and made themselves uncircumcised. Whew. Wow. Made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the holy covenant. That would be an operation. And forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen, were sold to do mischief. When the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of two realms. That was Egypt at the time was controlled. Okay, when Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided, I believe, into 4 parts. One of them was in Egypt. And he made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded. Thus they got strong cities in the land of Egypt. He spent in Egypt. He returned again in the 143rd year and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary, took away the golden altar and the candlestick of light. So in other words, the golden altar would have been the altar of incense, the candlestick of light and all the vessels thereof, and the table of showbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crown, and the golden ornaments that were for the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. He took the hidden treasures which he found. He went into his own land, having made a great massacre, and spoke very proudly. There was great mourning in Israel. And then it goes on to describe the mourning. And then they came back speaking, wanting to tax them a lot for more money. He sold a lot of the women and children. But by this time he had defiled, I can't read you all of this. He had defiled the temple so that the Jews wouldn't worship there. In verse 44, he says, the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah that they should follow the strange laws of the land and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, that they should profane the Sabbath and festival days and pollute the sanctuary in the temple. He set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrificed swine's flesh and unclean beast, and said they should leave their children uncircumcised and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, that they might forget the law. Now this let me go back to where we were, back in Matthew. I'm not going to read more than that to you. We're going to stick to Matthew in our study. But as an interpretation of Matthew 24 and the abomination of desolation, the concept that some have is that, I don't know what I'm doing. The concept some have, let me get back here. Y'all be patient with me and I'll make it. Come on. Here we go. Am I back up? Yeah. Did I ever leave? The concept that they have is that, by the way, the restoration of this, the Jews, in order to restore it, they defeated the Greeks at a certain point. A few years later, the Maccabees did. And in 1 Maccabees 4, verse 36, beginning, they remade. They wouldn't tolerate any of that stuff that had been polluted. It was all thrown away or discarded or whatever. And the temple itself, the altar was remade. Everything was redone so that it would be pure. So the Jews remember that. Anybody know when they celebrate it? They have created a holy day, not a New Testament holy day, but it's a feast of dedication. That was the rededication of the temple. It's referred to in 1 Maccabees chapter 4 and 2 Maccabees chapter 10. Hanukkah, yes. Hanukkah, about the same time as we observe Christmas. You probably have heard the Jews referring to Hanukkah. So the Jews celebrated that in the New Testament period, although it's not mentioned in the New Testament. So the idea is that of some is that this is initially a reference to that abomination of desolation under Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's telling the Jews, that's what these passages mean when it says, whoso readeth, let him understand. He's saying, hey, the same thing is going to happen that happened under Antiochus Epiphanes. So read what Daniel talked about it. It happened under Antiochus Epiphanes, and it's going to happen again. Now, I happen to think that's not necessarily correct. I think Daniel 9 points more toward the New Testament period than it does Antiochus, but there are abomination references to Antiochus in the book of Daniel. So that's another one. Another view, there's three views that I'm going to mention, says that the abomination of desolation refers to the Jews themselves. The zealots in the beginning of this war, the zealots were involved in actions. What was the fast and easy way I found this out? I found some of the hard ways that would take a long way to explain. And then I asked my computer, AI, Did the Jews desecrate the temple themselves in 66 AD? And they did. The zealots were involved in actions that could be considered desecration of the temple during the events of 66 AD. Primarily, they stopped the daily sacrifices to the Roman emperor. They were conceding that. They were making a daily sacrifice to the Roman emperor and fortifying themselves within the temple complex during this revolt. Then this escalated. You remember the zealots and others were in several factions. This escalated into battles inside the temple in 66 AD among the Jews. A lot of them were killed, contributing to the desecration of the site, and then setting something of the stage to the destruction that eventually happened under the Romans. So that it makes Matthew and Mark referring to something internal, the Jews themselves, or the abomination of desolation. Whereas Luke, who says, hey, if you remember Luke up here, 21:20, when you see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. So you've got three possible different interpretations. And I'm going with number one, the first one I told you about. Because under Cestius Gallus, you remember me talking about this, he made an attack against the city. Well, in fact, I may read you something here later on if there's time about that. He made an attack against the city with about 20,000 troops, and they were very poorly prepared and fighting among themselves. This was in 66 AD. And he had the city surrounded. He was ready to take it, and then he got kind of nervous about it and backed off and took his troops away. And anyway, I'll read you about it if there's time. So I wanted to go a little further here in Matthew 24. He says, then, when you see this abomination of desolation, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child. I think I've got that on this chart. Woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath days, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. All right. Let's talk about this a little bit. He says, let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. The mountains were, David spent a lot of time in those mountains, and he could hide in those mountains from Saul and everybody else. And so that was my grandmother living in northern Mississippi. There was an area just north of there between where my son is preaching now, up in Florence, Alabama. And my grandmother was from the area around Tupelo. No, Tupelo's way too civilized. It was out in the country, right against the border with Alabama. But between there was a heavily forested, hilly area called the Freedom Hills. And if you committed a crime, you went to the Freedom Hills. Because the sheriff was coming and he probably couldn't find you in the Freedom Hills. I could tell you stories, but that's all right. The mountains were the place of, there are two reasons to go to the mountains. First of all, it was going to be hard for the Romans to catch them. But secondly, they couldn't travel the roads because, let's see. Let me get out here. I'm going to read you this thing. Here. Yeah. Okay, where does it start? This is from Josephus. If I can find the beginning of it. There it is. Cestius Gallus, remember he was governor of Syria, he had brought his troops down there. So Josephus writes about it. He says, Cestius, observing that the disturbances that were begun among the Jews afforded him a proper opportunity to attack them, took his whole army along with him and put the Jews to flight and pursued them to Jerusalem. He then pitched his camp upon the elevation called Scopus, at Mount of Olives, I believe. When Cestius was come into the city, he set the part called Bezetha. That was what we usually call the northern section of the city. He set that on fire, as he did also the timber market, after which he came into the upper city. There was a new city, there was a Bezetha, and so forth, into the upper city, and pitched his camp over against the royal palace. And had he but at this very time attempted to get within the walls by force, he had won the city, and the war had been put an end at once. But a number of the officers had been corrupted by Florus and changed his mind. Thus did the Romans not make their attack against the wall for 5 days, but to no purpose. Now it was that a horrid fear seized upon the seditious, insomuch that many of them ran out of the city, as though it were to be taken immediately. But the people upon this took courage, and where the wicked part of the city gave ground, thither did they come, in order to set open the gates, to admit Cestius as their benefactor, who, had he but continued the siege a little longer, had certainly taken the city. But it was, I suppose, owing to the aversion God had already at the city and the sanctuary, that he was hindered from putting an end to the war that very day. It then happened that Cestius was not conscious either how the besieged despaired of its success, or how courageous the people were for him. So he recalled his soldiers from the place, despairing of any expectation of taking it. Without having received any disgrace, he retired from the city without any reason in the world. Further, that the time factor was critically limited is evident by, Josephus adds to this, as to those who had pursued. I'm going to tell you something. He withdrew. The Jews' army followed him, surrounded him at a place called Beth Horon, which was a narrow valley with cliffs on the side, and they wiped him out. But on their way back, these were the zealots. They were pretty mean. And so Josephus goes on and says, as to those who had pursued after Cestius, when they were returned back to Jerusalem, they overbore some of those that favored the Romans by violence, and some they persuaded by entreaties to join with them. Later, even the slightest intimation that someone was making plans to leave Jerusalem was justification for the insurrectionists to slit their throats. Do you see why he says, flee into the mountains? These people were on the roads, and you wanted to get away from there and not get anywhere near the roads where either the Romans or the zealots could find you fleeing from Jerusalem, or they'd kill you. And he says, let him which on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. They had flat roofs, and their houses were they were row houses with a lot of flat roofs. And so the indication is that he was telling them to just don't come down from the roof, just go from housetop to housetop over to the end of the thing and then get down on the ground and get out of there. Don't dally around. Neither let him which is in the field come back to take. Why? Well, Josephus just told you why. The army, the zealots, went out after the Romans and they defeated them. But when they came back, they were killing anybody trying to get out of Jerusalem. And so here's your chance. You've got a few days to beat it. Don't try to pack up the whole house and get a moving van and take your time. Get out of the city when the getting's good. You know, I've told you before, they went to Perea. And woe unto them that are with child. That would make it hard on a woman to travel fast in that difficult situation, and to them that give suck in those days. She would have to be caring for that child. Not able to travel on the roads, not able to travel in comfort on an animal necessarily, or in a cart. And then pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. It's cold in the winter. It makes it hard to travel. It makes it hard. I think one of the reasons why December 25th was not when the Lord was born. They wouldn't have been requiring them to travel in the middle of winter. The shepherds were still in the fields with their flocks. So the point I wanted you to get is how important it was to believe what Jesus was saying and don't delay. Get out of the city when the time comes. When you see the abomination of desolation, I think that was the Romans, and you see them withdraw. They stood there. The eagles were surrounding the city. They could have taken it any moment. It was getting more and more violent in the city. Lo and behold, for some reason, not a good reason, this man could have taken the city. That's what Josephus is saying. He could have had the city. There was a big population welcoming in. And the zealots were all fighting with one another. And so he could have just marched right in. He took two big sections of the city as it was. But for some reason, unexplained, he withdrew and left and was wiped out then. And those zealots went after him. So here it is, the city's empty of fighting people. Now's the time for a few days, perhaps a week, 2 weeks maybe. The city's empty. Get out. They're coming back. This is the desolation that you're looking for. Get out. And in your patience, wait for it. And when you see it, he says, in your patience, possess. One of the versions says, possess your souls. So they made it out, and went across the Jordan River on the border of Perea to a small city called Pella. And there were Gentiles there, and the Romans were not warring in that area, and they were safe. So I'm going to quit there, and we will take up the next section next week. He says in verse 22, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. It says I'm giving you a chance. Here it is. And so the Christians followed this advice and escaped the city. We'll look at more of Matthew 24 next week. Thanks for putting up with me. If you get hold of a copy of the Maccabees, you might want to read about Antiochus Epiphanes. I think Alan studied that with us quite a bit when he was studying Daniel, right?